as acting chair for today's March 16th Lincoln Lancaster County Planning Commission hearing due to the absence of Chair Tracy Edgerton and Vice Chair Cindy Ryman-Yost. Commissioner Corr, please call the order of the regular meeting of the Lincoln Lancaster County Planning Commission.
I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Lincoln Lancaster County Planning Commission of March 16th, 2022. A printed agenda is available outside the hearing room, and a copy of the full agenda, including the staff reports, is available at the front of the chambers with the clerk. The Open Meetings Act is posted just inside the doors at the back of the room. Please note the Planning Commission will be allowing testimony on agenda items by video conferencing for those individuals who pre-registered. If you parked in the parking garage across the street to the north, the gate is open and no parking coupons are needed. Out of courtesy for those attending this meeting, commissioners, and the staff, cellular phone usage is not permitted in these chambers during any portion of this meeting. We appreciate your cooperation. Please note the Planning Commission action today is final on the following agenda item. 1.3, which is Special Permit 22003. Any aggrieved person may appeal final action of the Planning Commission to the City Council or the County Board by filing a notice of appeal with the clerk within 14 days following the action of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission action on all other items is a recommendation to the City Council or County Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held March 2nd, 2022.
2002. March 2.
March 2, 2022.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. So moved. Campbell.
Second, Joy.
Campbell,
Yes.
Corr,
Yes.
Bruce,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
Minutes are approved 5-0 or 6-0.
The next item of business is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda will be called at the same time and will not be scheduled for a separate public hearing unless there is a request from someone wishing to speak or at the request of a commission member. I will ask Shelley to read all the consent agenda items into the record. Once those items are read, she will ask if there is anyone wishing to speak. If you wish to speak on an item on the consent agenda, we would ask that you stand and state that item. That item will then be removed from the consent agenda and scheduled as a separate public hearing under Section 3 of today's agenda. All items remaining on the consent agenda will be voted upon in total with a motion for approval. Shelley, will you please call the items on the consent agenda?
Yes, on the consent agenda today is item 1.1A, annexation 22002, to annex approximately 50.53 acres, more or less, associated with 1.1B, change of zone 17030D from AG Agricultural District to R3 Residential District PUD Planned Unit Development, to expand the Wandering Creek PUD to add additional residential area and adjust the lot layout of the residential transition area with associated waivers on approximately 51.53 acres, more or less, both of these on property generally located at South 94th and Van Dorn Streets. Next item is 1.2A, Comprehensive Plan Conformance 22003, to review as to conformance with the 2050 Lincoln Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan, a proposed amendment to the North 56th Street and Arbor Road redevelopment plan to identify the Lincoln Logistics redevelopment project to include construction of over 900,000 square feet of distribution space on property generally located at 65th Street and Arbor Road, associated with 1.2B, annexation 22003, to annex approximately 109.79 acres, more or less, on property generally located at North 70th Street and Arbor Road, also associated with 1.2C, change of zone 22005 from AG Agricultural District to I2 Industrial Park District over approximately 21.48 acres on property also located at North 70th Street and Arbor Road. Last item on the consent agenda is special permit 1.3, special permit 22003 for an ADU accessory dwelling unit on property generally located at 14880 South 134th Street. The Planning Commission is final unless appealed to the Lancaster County Board, so this is final action. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these items?
I don't see any.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting this site to be disclosed?
I don't think we have any of those either. I would entertain a motion.
Now, with the, if anybody,
He knows it better than I do.
Is there anyone wishing to speak on these consent agenda items? Please stand and state the item.
Yeah, I'd like to speak relative to annexation 22003.
let's see, special,
That's
Yeah.
the annexation of
for
roughly
the, it's the,
70th and Arbor Road or 56th and Arbor Road.
Okay. We'll pull that off and we'll let you come up in a little bit. Anyone else have an item they want to talk about? Okay, so we'll remove that one from the consent agenda. Do we need to remove the associated ones or just, okay.
I would move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second, Joy?
Shelley?
Campbell,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
and Joy,
Yes.
and Rodenberg.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
We will now have Shelley call the requests for deferral.
We received written communication on behalf of the applicant requesting a 2-week deferral until the next planning commission hearing of item 5.1 preliminary plat 04011A. This would delay public hearing and action to the March 30th, 2022 planning commission hearing. Again, this is request for deferral for item 5.1A preliminary plat 04011A for a preliminary plat amendment to show a revised street layout with associated waiver on property generally located at Waterford Estates Drive and Linwood Lane.
I would move to defer.
Second, Joy?
Shelley?
Campbell,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this application today? Okay. You're. Just go ahead and tell us your name and your address and,
My name's Joel Schreier. This is my wife Linda here. And we live at 9329 Southern Sky Road in Waterford Estates. So we're one of the homeowners right on the end of that last block there of Waterford Lane that's proposed, where they want to extend the road at Waterford Estates approximately couple blocks till it hits the current land for Southeast Community College. And so as a homeowner, we're concerned about, you know, what the need is of extending that road another block and how that would, you know, we can't see how that would enhance whatever Southeast Community College is doing, you know, in that area of their land. When we purchased our home in Waterford Estates 8 years ago, when it was first being built in that area, we knew that there was a 40-foot easement behind our property, and there would be no building in that area, so that whatever went in there, we'd have a fair amount of space between there. So now if they, number one, if they extend that road, we'll have a road approximately 10 feet from our, outside of our property, which we never intended or never knew that would happen when we purchased that property. And we've talked to several other people on our block that are so concerned that they're ready to list their home for sale because that's just not what they thought Waterford Estates would be about. And although as homeowners, we knew there would be development behind there, we knew that it should have been, would not be something that would go to Southeast Community College and build roads right along the property, which was never pointed out to all the homeowners when we purchased our properties. So this is a big change for us as homeowners. And so we look at the situation and we wonder why a road would have to be put up right next to the, basically, all along the homeowners' properties. And what that would really help Southeast Community College. To us, when we look at it, we think they should extend Linwood Lane straight toward O Street, and then whatever roads that they want inside of that whole property would be more inside of their tract of land and not right next to the property owners on the edge of the property. So that's our concern, and we know that currently in Southeast Community College there is traffic that goes through there on weekend where there's teenagers, early 20 people going through there with cars, making loud noise on the weekend.
In the
and
parking lot.
in the parking lot
Of the
back there.
college.
And so we're concerned that that might extend back through that road and just be another circular path where kids can go back there and, you know, make noise with their cars and, you know, affect the homeowners in that way. You know, we understand there's gonna be development there. I guess our big concern is that the road is just not being proposed to be in a place that's gonna be really, you know, taken into consideration of the homeowners that are living along there, which is 10 homeowners. There's 10 houses along that block that are affected. So I think that's the biggest concern we have. It's just such a huge change from what we did when we bought those properties, and putting a road right next to there, to us creates, you know, some potential problems. And we don't know exactly what the reason Southeast Community College really wants to put it right along the property line. How does that really benefit them? We don't understand that. So that's really our concerns, I think. Does that kind of?
Other than to mention, I'm Linda Schreier, I'm his wife, and we're both retired. And I can testify to, on the weekends, in Southeast Community College parking lot, the kids are just having a grand old time on the weekends. And we've raised boys, so I get it. But, yeah, I get it. I always said I have a pretend sheriff's badge here with my kids, yeah. And so I'm understanding of that. But like Joel said, we're just wondering why it has to be right along there right along the path of residential area for potential, their trash and their already burning rubber and speeding on the weekends for at least 2 hours. It's usually one weekend day every weekend. And our police department has obviously much more important things to do than to be bothered by that. So, and I don't know what their real rules are, but I think they do the best that they can. And it's just a potential for garbage and stuff that just doesn't need to be, in our opinion, and several other residents too. So that was something that I wanted Joel to make clear too, about that we already are hearing that problem, and why give them another whole road to just go speeding up behind the residents on the very north side there on Waterford Estates Drive.
Have you reached out to Southeast Community College at all and voiced your concerns about this activity?
I appreciate you asking that. I get directed to this person and this person and this person, and no one answers. I get an answering machine and no return calls. So,
Okay.
yeah. They don't live there. They don't know. They just don't. But we've just recently had some problems. Was it 2 nights ago? there was somebody lit off a big firework and started a wood fence down the way where that road is already at. It started it on fire. So there you go. You go to extend that, keep going Waterford Estates Drive and keep going west. They're going to be getting a lot of calls. Yeah, it just seems like there's a better option than extending that particular road going east and west.
Okay.
So, thank you for your time.
Thank you for bringing this up to our
Yeah.
attention.
You're welcome.
What was your house address?
At 9329 Southern Sky Road.
And you guys, your driveway's on Southern Sky Road, so this is your backyard, right?
This is our backyard, backs to the Southeast Community
We were
property.
the first ones to move in on the very west end, so
Thank you.
we already hear all the commotion from going on the
Thank you so much for your
weekends.
time.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we will now proceed, oh, any other people that want to testify on that application that was deferred? Okay, so now we'll proceed to public hearing. The staff will make a brief presentation. The applicant will then be requested to present his or her testimony, followed by those who wish to testify in support, followed by those who wish to testify in opposition. The staff will then be given an opportunity to respond to the testimony, and then the applicant shall have an opportunity for rebuttal. If during your testimony you have copies of documents or materials you would like distributed to the Planning Commission members and or included as part of the record, please provide that information to the clerk for distribution. Each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. The timer will go off after 4 minutes, then you will have 1 minute to wrap up your testimony. The Planning Commission will vote immediately at the close of the public hearing unless the commission votes to defer action or continue the public hearing. Shelley, will you please call the first public hearing item?
Yes, the first item that has been removed from consent agenda for public hearing is item 1.1A, annexation 22002. Are there any ex parte communications to be disclosed on these applications?
I don't see any.
Are there any ex parte communications that took place or additional information you learned while visiting any of this site to be disclosed?
No. Right, Steve.
Steve Hendrickson with the Planning Department. It appears our lost our internet connection here, so we'll have to improvise. So on the map here, this is an annexation that is associated with the Lincoln Logistics Hub. And the Lincoln Logistics Hub is basically on the south side of Arbor Road. We'll see if we can get this to work here or not. There we go, fair enough. On the south side of Arbor Road, and the change of zone itself, this is between 56th Street and 70th Street. The change of zone that is associated with this was for about 21 acres. And that 21 acres was generally just in this area here on the north. And as a result of annexing the area of the change of zone, you ended up with an area here in the middle that was completely surrounded by the city limits. Plus, there was this little gap that would have been left out had we only annexed the change of zone of 100 feet or so, and the county engineer noted they really didn't want to be in charge of maintaining a little 100-foot strip in the middle of Arbor Road between 56th Street and 70th Street, which certainly made sense. So the policy of the comprehensive plan is that when property gets completely surrounded by the city limits, it shall be annexed. This is an area where all of the services are generally available. It's an area that is developing. And so in addition to annexing the area that is requested by the applicant as part of the Lincoln Logistics Hub, the Planning Department added 80 acres to that request. That includes some more of the Lincoln Logistics Hub property, as well as 3 other private property owners. That way, everything between 56th and 70th south of Arbor Road would all be inside the city limits. It conforms with the city's policies, and so we had recommended approval of the larger annexation and had notified all of the property owners who were involved that this area was proposed for annexation. Be happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Steve? Okay, thank you. Testimony from the applicant.
Good afternoon, members of the Planning Commission. Danae Kalkowski appearing today on behalf of Tribedo LLC, which is the owner of the property who made the initial annexation request for the Lincoln Logistics project. As Steve mentioned, we just made the request for the area. Really what we are considering is the first phase of the project, which is the property along Arbor Road, kind of leaving the south 2/3 unannexed. And then Planning Department came back with the recommendation to expand the annexation to include all of our property, plus then the 2 additional properties that are located adjacent to us that would be surrounded by the annexation. So we're obviously supportive of the annexation to the extent we need it on our property. And we'd be happy to answer any questions. It kind of goes along with the change of zone. There's already a preliminary plat out there, so I don't think that there's a question about the appropriateness of the annexation on our property.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Testimony in support of the annexation. Testimony in support.
Yes, my name is Nick Cusick, N-I-C-K, C-U-S-I-C-K. I live at 6400 West Shore Drive, which is a long ways away from the property in question, but I am familiar with the property. I want to read a brief letter from the property owner that is in question here, Sam Sampson. My name is Sam Sampson. I own the land adjacent to the west of the development being discussed today. I'm appointing Nick Cusick to represent me on this issue. I'm opposed to being annexed to the city of Lincoln for several reasons, which Nick will present today. I am currently at the Cleveland Clinic having a cardioversion on my heart. I am also having my pacemaker rewired, so I may live to fight another day. Thank you for your consideration. That's from Mr. Sampson, and I did get an email from his one of his family members. He did have surgery this morning, and he's doing fine. So with that being said, I'll just kind of make the case. I hear in support of the annexation and the other actions that are being taken because I'm familiar with the property. I'm certainly the White Lotus Group, who is affiliated, obviously, with the developer there, a longtime Chamber of Commerce member, all about economic development. So my comments are positive on all of that front, except for the piece of property that is indeed being annexed as part of this, or is proposed to be annexed. That would be to the west. It's defined as Lot 40 and 42, southwest quarter of Section 28-11-7. Mr. Hendricks did refer to that as being added, as did Ms. Kalkowski. I think if I know how to use this, do I know how to use this?
You got it.
Yeah, so the property, if it's appropriate, if I can point, so it's this property right here that Mr. Sampson owns. I guess the rationale for objecting would be multiple issues. Number one, as indicated, it was added by administrative action, not at the request of the owner. Certainly we understand the donut hole or the contiguous nature of the policy. However, I do have, and would be happy to show them, I do have a variety of examples where there are donut holes on the outskirts of the city currently, unless you consider a donut hole not to include 2 squares touching each other in the corner, which technically speaking might be considered congruency, but in reality, it isn't really. And certainly I'm supportive of that policy of not the donut hole and all of that in general. But my other points that I'd want to make on behalf of Mr. Sampson, this is undevelopable marshland. Indeed, it acts as a buffer between the industrial areas and commercial areas to both the north and the south, and to the further west off of 56th Street. It often has as much as 2 and 3 feet of water in it. And while there is no cattails, there is reeds and et cetera. So certainly it acts as a buffer to collect pollutants and sediment that runs off of any of those areas being developed there before it gets into the creek, before it gets into the waterways. I think there's value to that. Mr. Sampson does have that enrolled. He's owned it about 20 years, maybe a little bit more. He currently has it enrolled in 1 or more conservation programs with the Corps or the NRD, or I know his Pheasants Forever. I wasn't able to collect all that because he just got this notice and forwarded it to me just last week, and he was at the Cleveland Clinic when he got it and got forwarded it to him, so he asked me to appear on his behalf. And I guess one of the other issues, on the assumption that it's not developable, there's no ultimate benefit of having this in the city. There's no need for water, there's no need for sewer, there's no need for roads, there's no need for fire, there's no structures on the property. There will never be any structures on the property, presumably. So, And then, of course, there's the likelihood that taxes will indeed increase on a piece of property that has no commercial value. It's purely a conservation value. I think the current valuation is $128,000. So the bottom line is, while we're supportive of the overall annexation, we would request the possibility of, despite the donut hole typical policy that has been violated in other cases, we'd request having that section removed from the annexation. I'd be happy to answer any questions and appreciate your consideration.
Go ahead.
Nick, is it possible to put any building on that piece of property? It
I would
appears-
think now it's
it
effectively in a floodplain.
appears at the north end of it where that little symbol is.
Where it says H14 on that particular
Yeah.
map, I think that's higher certainly than the east end, so certainly an appropriate question. There has been some ongoing fill on the south side. There's been some buildings that have been built. You can kind of see them on the south side. There's been some work done in that area. So I guess to be honest, would never say never on that end. I would say I can't imagine, because there's kind of a dam that runs, well, that white line, if you will, that white line that delineates the property that's owned by the applicant and Mr. Sampson's property, that's effectively a dam. So there's a waterway through there, and there's a culvert that goes underneath that little road/dam. I don't know if it's an official dam, but so I would say possibly a fourth or less of that could be developable at some point, but it would take major fill to do that.
Show me how the water flows.
The water would flow in this particular case, well, it would certainly flow from the north and the south, from commercial property into that area. Most of the water would flow from the west. So it would flow from commercial property down here through some undeveloped area and then into this, which again, depending on the time of year, obviously last year was very dry, but there has been years when there was as much as 2 or 3 feet of water standing in this area.
Where does it go then?
It would go down into there's a holding pond that I would believe that I'm pointing to right here, if you can see it. That is effectively, that dark spot shows a holding pond that I believe would largely be runoff from these fields. So it'd be an agricultural holding pond. And then it drains down into a creek, and then eventually it comes down here someplace and gets into what I believe that's Salt Creek.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Further testimony in support of this application? Okay. Is there any neutral testimony? Testimony in opposition? All right, staff questions.
Steve, you used the word shall be annexed. So there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in there.
Steve Hendrickson, Planning Department, 555 South 10th Street. Forgot to add that earlier. Yes, and the 2 holes that were referred to, donut holes, but one of those is in the area of 70th to 84th Street from Yankee Hill Road north to Pine Lake. And that was actually proposed for annexation several years ago when it was not 100% surrounded by the city limits. And the city council decided to not annex it at that time, but look to annex it in the future. That area is now 100% surrounded by the city limits. The planning department sent all of the property owners a letter last fall because it's part of an area where we have a lot of acreages. Our new way of trying to put people in as much notice as possible is we were trying to send them a letter as much as 9 months in advance of the annexation. So this summer, we would be coming back forward before you as the first step. First, having neighborhood meetings, trying to explain all the questions as we can, answer as many questions, but that area will be proposed for annexation as it had been in the past. The other one is out just to the southwest of the airport, and it occurred when a piece of property came in with an annexation agreement that said, we acknowledge we don't want water and sewer, but we would like to develop our property. It's an area for commercial and industrial development. So we annexed that property with an agreement that it didn't have water and sewer. It created a little hole in the city limits. We was talking about 2 properties touching at a point. But the rest of the properties there, we don't really have water and sewer in the area or anywhere nearby. And without an agreement where they acknowledge that they're going to get annexed but not have access to all city services, it's really not an area we could annex at this time. So it created a regrettable little hole for the moment until we do get services closer to those properties. So in this case here, I would say there's really 2 separate issues going on. Mr. Sampson is objecting, concerned about that the annexation will increase the value of his property. And it may, if he had greenbelt or something like that, may change that, but it's not rezoning his property. It's not changing any of the characteristics other than he would be in the city limits, and depending on the value of his property, he might pay more taxes. I do agree that from our maps, it looks like his property is very low value. It's 100% in the floodplain. It looks, according to our maps, which are not official core maps, that the vast majority of it is wetlands. And I think the purpose of the acquisition of that property was to retain the wetlands, which is a very admirable thing. But it is zoned H4. And so if the property owner wanted to come forward and do a conservation easement or perhaps rezone it out of H4, arguing, I can't use this for commercial, that would probably be very appropriate. We've had other wetland outlot areas that were zoned out of a commercial use because they had no commercial use for them. So that's really kind of a separate question we could work with Mr. Sampson on, is does he want to actually have a formal conservation easement? Maybe he already does. Things that would address to the assessor what is the value of this property. And if rezoning that property helped and made sense because there's no value to commercial use to it, then that might be appropriate to rezone. So that's really a separate topic than the one that's before you, which is it's surrounded by the city limits. Water and sewer are generally available to the site. For multiple reasons, we don't want to have one little pocket that has to be served by the sheriff, served by the rural fire departments, not inside the City of Lincoln Public School District. Even in this case, there's going to be no kids coming from the property. But it just creates a lot of jurisdictional issues when you have a little pocket that is then surrounded by the city limits. So we appreciate the concerns about value, but we think they're all really better addressed from other measures than not annexing the property.
Steve, what would the change of zone, what would it go to?
In other cases, people have had a change of zone to AG agricultural. Even though they're not actually going to probably farm the property, it just shows that this property is not approved for commercial use. And so that's what we've done in some of the other cases. We had one of these recently out on West O Street, just about Southwest 14th, where we have the new volleyball, basketball, recreational center. Just to the west of it was a medium-sized wetland that was floodplain wetlands, had no value, it was platted as an outlot, and it got zoned AG just to give one more reason to the assessor to show that this is probably a low value. Again, the assessor may look at those other factors, floodplain, wetland, unbuildable outlot, and say, well, that's enough to say that it's a low value. You may not even need to rezone it. In this case, I think he has a IT buildable lot, so technically he could build on it, but he'd have to address the floodplain and the wetland and lack of access and a lot of other issues.
With that being a separate issue, would you or the department be willing to work with Mr. Sampson to assist in changing that zone?
I mean, if Mr. Sampson, once he's feeling better, or if someone representing him wanted to talk about what are these other things that might be done, we'd be happy to talk with them, as well as checking in with the assessor's office as to what do they view as the value of the property, and does annexation change it? And if X and Y was done, if it was rezoned or there's a conservation easement, would that be enough for them to say, yes, the value of this property is at near zero?
And can ag still exist inside the city limits?
Yes, yeah, there's no prohibition on agriculture inside the city limits.
Okay.
And it's okay to do that surrounded by H4?
Yes, because the particulars of this property are, this property can't really be used, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be zoned H4.
Perfect.
Again, if it was an unbuildable outlot that said unbuildable outlot, you may not, and had conservation easement on it, that may be enough for the assessor. But that's really up to them to determine what are the factors that lower the value of a property, but we could certainly work with them.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other questions for Steve right now? Okay, thank you. Applicant rebuttal. Okay. I would entertain a motion.
Could I ask Mr. Kuzic to come back up? Nick, do you know, does this have a conservation easement on it?
You know, it's in some programs, he'd tell me, but I honestly, because of timing, I think he just got this notice, like I say, a week or so ago, notwithstanding Mr. Hendrickson indicating they tried to give people more time, 9 months, I think he mentioned on something. This came as a surprise last week. I think it was last week, might have been 10 days ago. So, and I had minimal, he was actually at Cleveland at the time. He came back and now is back there, went back there yesterday for this heart surgery, so I didn't really get a chance to spend much time with him due to his health. So he has just told me it's in some programs. And again, Sam's a friend of mine, so that's how I ended up being here, so.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
Sure.
I would move to approve the annexation to 2003.
Well,
Oh, close the public hearing.
before you do that, I don't need to have any applicant rebuttal after we had him come back up or anything. Okay.
I would move to close the public hearing.
Second, Joy?
Shelley?
Campbell,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
Public hearing closed, 6-0.
I would move to approve the annexation 22003 and ask the planning department to work with Mr. Sampson to change the zoning on that property.
Is that part of your official motion?
Yeah.
I think that that's a given. I mean, the planning department always works with people on changing
Yeah.
the zoning.
But I think that it's just appropriate. I mean, the annexation is what I'm proposing as a motion, and just a reference to asking the planning department to continue to work.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Edens, sorry.
Is that appropriate, Steve?
Oh, they're coming up.
Here we go.
Here they go.
The lawyer is gonna say nope.
Tim C., Assistant City Attorney. I think what I heard Commissioner Campbell talk about in clarifying his comments is that the motion is for the annexation
Correct.
with a comment more than a motion to
Correct.
ask the planning department to work with the property owner. So as
That's
long as that's
correct.
clear,
Yeah,
I think then what's before the commission is the annexation matter.
Correct.
Okay, so I want to, how will that show up in the minutes then? I want to make sure before we vote on it.
I think it'll show up in comments made by Mr. Campbell as part of the minutes. So in other words, in the comments surrounding this item.
Okay,
So
not
but
gonna
not
It will
official
not show
motion.
up as an official
No.
motion.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Discussion.
Well, it's obvious that we'd like to keep the city boundaries relatively full in whatever area it is. So it makes sense to approve the annexation, but I do think Mr. Kuzic has brought forth some knowledge about that piece of property, that obviously its value is not that much, other than I know that he has in the past sold the rights to certain pieces of that property for where people needed to offset wetland areas and fill in. So that property has been is piecemealed as projects need to find some place to offset wetlands in that. But as a rule, it's not got a whole lot of value to it. So I just think that we should try to encourage assistance to find the best zoning and talking with the assessor that keeps the property at a very minimal value.
I agree with staff and Commissioner Campbell. I think that it's appropriate to include this in the annexation, and then we can use some other tools to address the valuation and the concerns there. So I will be supporting the annexation. Shelley?
Campbell,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Cruz,
Yes.
Edens,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
Motion carried, 6-0.
At this time, anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda may do so. I would entertain a motion.
I'd move that we adjourn.
Second, Joy.
Shelley?
Campbell,
Yes.
Core,
Yes.
Cruz, Edens,
Yes.
Joy,
Yes.
Rodenberg.
Yes.
We are adjourned.